All right, we're going to go over Chapter 9 Notes, Part 1. We're going to review the endocrine system, talk about some of its major functions, hormones, and identify the major glands. So the endocrine system, which we talked about in Chapter 1, is the chemical coordinating and directing system of the body, maintaining our homeostasis in terms of, growth and food, how we process glucose, changes in our body throughout our lifetime. It's partnered with our fast-acting nervous system and controlled by our nervous system, but the medium that the endocrine system uses to control either cause or inhibit different things that happen in our body is by way of hormones. And these hormones get into our bloodstream and they travel to target cells that are sensitive to these hormones, and changes are happening. So in this picture, you're going to see the major endocrine organs. What's kind of interesting about the endocrine system is that it's not a continuous set of organs that are connected to each other. Like if we think about the digestive system, it's one big tube, or the cardiovascular system where you have, the heart attached with blood vessels and, to get blood around the body. This is just a group of little pieces of glandular tissue that are kind of spread out throughout the body, who produce these chemicals, these hormones that end up causing huge changes in the body. Endocrine glands are relatively small, in comparison to, like, say, the liver or the stomach and the intestines, but as I just said, their products, their hormones, have a huge, powerful effect. We have two major classes of hormones in the body, all right? These chemical signals, these chemical messengers, protein hormones and steroid hormones. And I want you to do a mental float back to Chapter 2 when we had our 4 classes of organic molecules. We had carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and nucleic acids. If we talk about proteins, all right, we should understand that the building blocks is amino acid. Steroid hormones, well, a steroid was a class of lipids, and so they're made out of different building blocks. Because of these different building blocks, they're going to affect their target cells differently. So as I just said, protein hormones, they're made out of amino acid, okay? The majority of the hormones in our body are amino acid or protein hormones. Steroid hormones, their building block is cholesterol, all right? We have fewer steroid hormones in comparative to protein hormones. Some examples of them are sex hormones, like you've probably heard of estrogen or testosterone. And then from the adrenal cortex, we have classes of hormones that are called corticosteroids that are all steroid hormones. And then the third semi-class of hormones are called prostaglandins. And those are local hormones. So I like to think about prostaglandins are like local produce, okay? So when you go to a farmer's market, you're eating food or products that were grown locally in your community, and then, people consume them locally in their community. That's how prostaglandins work. Protein hormones, steroid hormones, they're produced and they go in the bloodstream, and they may travel to far off distances in the body to affect their target cells. But where prostaglandins are produced is exactly where they have their targeted effect. And they are made from fatty acids. So it's easy for them to get into the cells because, as we remember, the cell membrane is that phospholipid bilayer, and things that are lipid soluble can very easily get through the plasma membrane. Hormones in general, besides prostaglandins, are secreted into the bloodstream, okay? They get out into the bloodstream, they're picked up by the blood, and then again, they're going to travel throughout the body, and they're only going to affect cells that have the appropriate receptors for that hormone. And those specific cells are called target cells. Target cells have receptors that are specific for different hormones. But depending upon what type of hormone you are, if you're a protein hormone or your steroid hormone, the receptors are going to be in different locations. And it all has to do with chemistry. And a hormone can only affect a cell if it has the receptors that are meant for that specific lock and key fit with that hormone. So what do hormones do? Well, they can affect the permeability of the plasma membrane, or they can end up exciting or causing an electrical impulse to occur. They can say to the cell, hey, you need to make this structure, or you need to stop making this structure, so they can be, regulating cell products or inhibiting activity. They can say, hey, cells, it's time to divide, it's time to get bigger. Or they can say, I need you to make more of X or more of Y. So again, we have our two main classes of hormones, steroid hormones and protein hormones, that are made up of different molecules. They have different chemistry to them, okay? If we're going to talk about the two of them, one is a lipid-soluble or hydrophobic makeup, and the other one is a water-loving or hydrophilic or charged molecule. Well, steroid hormones are lipids, they are hydrophobic, okay? They're also fat or lipid-soluble, which means they can really gain entry easily into the cell. Protein hormones, however, are larger charged amino acids. They are hydrophilic. They cannot pass through the plasma membrane. So because of these chemical properties, how they affect their target cells are different. Steroid hormones, because they are able to pass through the plasma membrane, their receptors are actually located on the inside of the cell, and they can do a process called direct gene activation. Protein hormones, because they are not lipid soluble, they are charged molecules, their receptors are located on the plasma membrane cell surface. They bind with the receptor on the outside of the plasma membrane. That binding action actually stimulates a second messenger on the inside of the cell to carry out that protein hormone's bidding. It's almost like a tag team type effect. So again, steroid hormones, because they are lipid soluble, they can very easily diffuse across the plasma membrane and get inside their target cells, okay? Once they are inside their target cells, they are going to bind with their receptors that are either in the cell or in the nucleus, and they are going to directly cause transcription and translation. And we know transcription and translation are the two act play for protein synthesis. So they are going to directly get into cells and cause stuff to happen. So here we go, showing this right here. Hopefully you can see I'm going to get a little laser pointer, and hopefully that will help. Okay, so here's the steroid hormone right here. It can easily pass through the plasma membrane. It's going to bind with its specific receptor. Again, even though it's easy for the steroid hormone to get into the cell, it's got to have the appropriate receptor to bind. It binds, and then the steroid receptor complex comes into the nucleus and will bind to DNA and will cause specific genes to go through transcription and translation. What's the product of that? A new protein. Maybe that's collagen, maybe that's an enzyme, who knows what that protein is going to be, but it directly stimulates, okay, the production of genes. Why do we call it direct gene activation? Because it can directly get into the cell. Nobody's, holding it up because of its chemistry. Here we have the protein hormones with the second messenger system. So protein hormones are larger charged water-soluble molecules. They're not lipid-soluble. They cannot pass through the plasma membrane. So they are going to rely on a second messenger system, which to me is almost like playing a game of tag, or like in a race when you pass a baton on to somebody else. When you run the 4x1, every single person is running, 100 meters of that 4x1, right? And they're passing the baton off. So this is what's happening in the second messenger system. The baton is essentially being passed off to a second messenger inside the cell, okay, to be able to carry out the protein hormone's will. So the protein hormones binds to the membrane receptor, which is on the surface of the plasma membrane. This binding of protein hormone and receptor, catalyzes a reaction. And that reaction causes a second messenger molecule, with an example being CAMP, which is cyclic AMP, okay? So cyclic adenosine monophosphate, to carry out whatever the job was or the message was from the protein hormone. So what does this look like? So here it says non-steroid hormone. So you could write in protein hormone. So this is specific, all right? There's got to be a specific lock and key receptor fit. So when the protein hormone binds with a receptor that's on the plasma membrane surface, it's going to catalyze a reaction. It's going to activate an enzyme that is going to activate or turn on a second messenger on the inside of the cell. This second messenger is then going to carry out whatever the job was of this little protein hormone that couldn't make its way into the cell. In regards of the endocrine system, there are 3 ways in which it is stimulated to function, either by way of hormones, by way of humors or different fluid levels of chemicals within the body, or it's going to be directly stimulated by the nervous system. So hormonal stimulation, what does this mean? Hormonal stimulation of the endocrine system happens when a hormone from one endocrine organ prods or pushes another endocrine gland to produce its hormones. And we call this tropic. Okay, let me back up for a second. So when a hormone causes a gland to produce a hormone, all right, that's hormonal stimulation. Those hormones are called tropic, T-R-O-P-I-C. Another way that the endocrine system is stimulated to function is humoral stimulation. So the body is constantly getting sensory input about the fluid levels. So what's the calcium like? What's the sodium like? What's the potassium like? What's glucose like? How much water do I have? How much solutes do I have? This is always happening in the body, okay? And so when different things fluctuate or go out of homeostasis, our blood, our humors, our fluid are going to stimulate different endocrine glands via feedback mechanisms to function. And the example I have here, if blood calcium level drops below normal, it's going to stimulate the parathyroid gland to produce parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone is then going to activate osteoclasts in the bone, chapter 5, cause them to break down bone matrix, release that calcium into the bloodstream. We get back up to homeostatic level, parathyroid hormone release is going to stop. And then finally, the last way that the nervous system is stimulated to function is via actual direct nerve fibers coming out and stimulating them. Like the motor output is the nerve fibers are stimulating the adrenal medulla to produce adrenaline. And adrenaline is, another word for adrenaline is noradrenaline or epinephrine or norepinephrine, and that causes our sympathetic nervous system or our fight or flight nervous system to get ready to rock. And again, these are just our major endocrine glands, and we're going to be talking about these in class. And this is just a picture of where they're located in the body. Again, what's interesting about these is that it's not a continuous organ system like others in our body. You have these little bits of glandular tissue that are kind of spread out all throughout the body. But again, hormones, their products, have a massive effect on the body, and if they are not in homeostasis, can have catastrophic, even deadly effects on the body.